Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more, all to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special episode of Eyes Wide Open for the Best of 2023 compilation of episodes. This is going to be a two-parter spreading over Christmas and New Year's. For week one here, we're going to talk to some of the guests that I've had over the last year, including Dr. Elizabeth Federick, Dr. Kirk Honda, Calley Means, Macy Schuchart, Callie Ezell. And then next week, we are going to also have a special edition, but that's going to be focused on the reality TV industry and clips from some of the amazing guests that we've had this year, including my ex-wife, Danielle, who we kicked off early in this season with a honest conversation about our whole experience from beginning to where we were on Love is Blind. We'll also talk to Alyssa Barmundi from Married at First Sight. We'll talk to Olivia Frazier, who was most recently on, Stephanie Davidson from 90 Day Fiancé, and of course, we'll talk a little bit with the UCAN Foundation. So next week, you'll get the best of reality TV. This week, you'll get the best of everything else. And I hope that you enjoy these clips, take a trip down memory lane, or maybe find some episodes you haven't listened to yet if you're new to the show. So thank you, and I hope that this helps you go through life with your eyes wide open. And before we get to the clips, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us all in the algorithm. Thank you, and have a wonderful holiday season. Our guest today is a licensed therapist, professor, and the host of Psychology in Seattle. One of the reasons I like Dr. Kirk, in all honesty, is when I've seen some of the videos and the content he's produced out there, I feel like he is very compassionate. I feel like he's very empathetic, and I feel like he is non-judgmental, which is very rare when someone's commenting on, culture, reality TV. Everybody seems to put their opinion in whether or not they're a mental health professional. So his coverage of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp actually led him to basically become a victim of an online bully mob that was coming at him from both sides, the Johnny Depp side, the Amber Heard side. I wanted to share this interview because there is a dark side of the internet, and it is that online bully mob. And I really want to talk about the impacts that has on someone, because I've experienced it myself, and then hearing Dr. Kirk's story inspired me to reach out.
When I hear two people conflicting, they have a fight, or they have a long relationship or a past relationship, Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. I'm a marriage therapist, so I hear this all the time. For example, with couples, they'll come in and they'll talk about a fight they had the night before, and I will hear completely different stories. And long story short, what I've learned is that we not only perceive things emotionally, but we remember things and recall things emotionally. So we don't record reality in an objective way, like a video recording or something.
Right.
We pay attention to certain things. We emphasize, we distort, particularly if we have a lot of relational traumas growing up. So I've learned that it's hard. It's impossible for me to know as a couples therapist. And of course, I have hours and hours of time to investigate, to ask questions, to get a sense of what really happened. And I concluded a long time ago that I'll never know. I could take my best guess, but I'll never know. So when I'm watching this trial, and I've been a part of these things before, divorces, not only in court and out of court professionally, but I just have a philosophy that I don't know. It kind of looks like this, but there's no way for me to know. And I've learned before, I've been burned, that if I commit and I'm 100% sure, almost all the time something comes up where I'm like, ooh, I was wrong. So I'm always extremely tentative, and I speak from that. So when I was watching the trial, I was saying, well, okay, she's making this claim. If that's, and what I always use it as a jumping off point. That's what I do with the reality TV, because I don't know if any of the reality TV is real. It could be all manufactured.
I can tell you most of it's not.
Right. It could be scripted-ish, or even the cast members could be putting something out there. So if I depended on things to be exactly real, then I'll have nothing to say because I don't know what's real, but I can use it as a jumping off point. So with Amber Heard, she'd be accusing Johnny Depp of something, and then I would say, well, if that's true, then here's my experience working with people who actually have had that happen to them, or here's what PTSD is, here's what borderline personality is, here's what histrionic. One psychologist is saying that she does have borderline, another psychologist is saying she doesn't have borderline. I don't know. I wasn't there. I haven't looked at the testing. I don't know Amber Heard, but for clients that I've worked with that have borderline, or clients that I've worked with who have had a partner who had borderline, here's what I can say. And that's what I did. So
which is so objective. That's such a fair, objective way to look at it, which is why I thought you had some crazy hot take that I was going to be like, okay, but it doesn't. But then again, yeah.
99.9999% of people online, according to my observation and a lot of people telling me, including clinicians, by the way, were landing on one side or the other. And not only landing on pro Amber Heard or pro Johnny Depp, but they were ridiculing the other side and saying, if you're supporting Johnny Depp, then you're a narcissist. If you're supporting Amber Heard, then you're borderline or whatever. And there were just a lot of things that were there was a lot of attacking online. And so,
well, and the weaponization of their mental health too is, nothing bothers me more than seeing uneducated people diagnosing people they don't know. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And people will accuse me of diagnosing people online, but I don't. I'm always clear about that. There might be times when I don't emphasize the tentativeness enough, which I'll take responsibility for, but I'm very careful to not, because I philosophically know that there's no way for me to do that. When I do diagnose people in my office, I have the benefit of years of time with them to be able to hone in on something, particularly something like a personality disorder. Anyway, so I started to get attacked online by both sides. So the pro Amber Heard side, and no one was in the middle, seemingly. So now I will say there was a silent majority of people who were either leaning Amber Heard or leaning Johnny Depp, who absolutely were okay with what I was saying, but they're not very vocal. That's the thing.
They're the ones that, don't have the extreme opinion to feel they need to be vocal.
Yeah. And certainly, as a podcaster for almost 15 years now, I've experienced online bullying and criticism and hatred and death threats and, all sorts of things. So, but this was different. This was the first time when I truly understood what people like you go through as a more famous person who experiences this crowd organized. It's one thing if someone just comments and says, you're a jerk face, I don't like you, read a book, go back to school, you're a terrible clinician. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, you signed up for it.
It doesn't feel good, and it's awful, and it will plague me and keep me up at night. But it's I'd never experienced an organizational structure to the mob where they would track things. They would confer on Reddit, and they would say, here's how we're going to get him. Here's how we're going to organize. Here's how we're going to pool resources. Here's what we need to do. Here's how we're going to suppress his supporters. Here's how we're going to get him off the internet. Here's how we're going to get his license removed. Here's how we're going to get him fired from his university. Here's how we're going to...
That is insane.
Yeah, no, it is. And I got a light version of it. People like yourself, and even people involved with the trial. I mean, there were forensic psychologists who were just doing their job, hired by one side or the other, providing their testimony, who experienced, I think, millions of people going after them. So this was the first time where that happened, and it was rough.
I talked to Callie Ezell, and she is a Chicago-based abstract artist and the founder, entrepreneur with McMillan Street Art. And Callie spent 10 years of her life in a cult. This story is something that's really important, I think, for everybody to hear. So I'm going to thank Callie for coming on, and I hope that this helps you go through life with your eyes wide open.
There were two things they really did to us in the beginning that were, I think, the two things. And I think the first one, I remember the guy telling us, this is going to break you, and it's going to break you for God, and it's going to lead you to like a place. So if you've ever watched any of those documentaries on those things called hell houses where they do these insanely elaborate haunted houses. That was the first like real mission of my first year. So I get there. There's the ceremony, the ring ceremony, which I'll talk about in a minute because that's insane. I should have. If that were to happen today, I'd be like, what? I would stand up and yell, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, is this for real? This is insane. You guys are nuts. But I wasn't, and I didn't. But I'll tell you about that in a minute. So we did this hell house. It was, again, I won't say the name, but it's huge. When I say massive, I think there was something like 50-something thousand people go through this every year. And it lasts for like a month, if I remember correctly.
All part of the same program or call?
Oh, yeah. So our whole program puts this on because there's like a couple hundred, like 100 to 200 or something like that of us. Some volunteers come from the church that's attached to this program. And it's huge. When I say they filled up like a 15,000 square foot warehouse. So first thing is we build it. And then you start to get separated out onto teams. And so they start to ask like,
we're first years. Do they position it as a game? Is it like a game or?
It's a way to win souls for Christ. It's the most intense thing that'll ever be done. But really, you can kind of see that they just think this is so cool. But the really messed up part about this that I think screwed with me really bad was, and I look back on this now and I'm just mortified and horrified that this happened. There were different scenes that you walked through and each scene depicted something different. And, one was an abortion scene. One was a car crash DUI scene. One was a, suicide or unaliving scene. And first of all, that's so messed up. Again, it's the emotional manipulation. It's always the emotional manipulation because otherwise for the love of God, don't reason with them. Manipulate them emotionally. It's easier.
Right.
And so
because they don't have reason. Reason's not on their side.
No. And so the easiest thing to do is to just screw with people. And that's what this does. I mean, imagine having lost somebody to one of these things and imagine walking through there and just being depicted in the just most monstrous way. And, seeing these people, the devil comes out and is like, they deserved it when the DUI, they brought in a real car and they had a tree in there. I mean, it was very elaborate. It was insane.
Holy shit. So they were like, someone playing the devil, look at this car crash, don't ever drink. Oh my God. There were latex prosthetics on, I mean, it was very elaborate. It was crazy, but it was, So I thought you were basically, when you said hell house, I thought you were like exaggerating or using hyperbole, but this sounds like a literal fucking hell house.
No, it was actual hell. And they started announcing the scenes and they were like, if you've dealt with any of these things, we want you to come tomorrow and talk to us. And so there's a group of
I haven't dealt with any of them. I'm good.
Oh, I didn't know any better and I didn't really understand the context. So I went back. They had said, if you had dealt with like self-hate, like, depression, things like that. So I did, and they asked me to tell them about it. And it's a group of like 3 or 4 of the staff members, grown adults. And I'm telling them how like I have just really, it's been hard for me like to not, just all these things, how I dealt with just depression and sadness and how it had been, really difficult the, last few years and all this kind of stuff. So they put me in the suicide scene, the unaliving scene. And so for about 4 hours a night, I would sit there with a dull razor blade and a blood pill, and I would run it across my arm every time a new group came in and fall into the bathtub. And I sat there and unalived myself over and over again for 4 hours so that in case there was a girl in the audience that was dealing with the same things, that she could see herself. It's one of my biggest regrets. I'm so ashamed that I did it because it's traumatizing. I mean, and
I can't even imagine. what that was like for you.
And at the end of the night, you go home and you just feel so disassociated because you have to sit and just disassociate, you know?
I mean, how else are you going to survive? Like literally theatrics of killing yourself. Like what a horrific.
Yeah. And why would you choose somebody that deals with that? You know, why not? Absolutely. You know, but
An
why would you
actor.
do it? Why would you do it in the first place?
Right.
So we're not dealing with a reason here. And, you know, the other scenes, and I'll leave it at this, the other scenes, they actually chose people who had dealt with those things too. And so they're reliving their worst nightmares over and over and over for 4 hours. You know?
It's almost like a public
and it's just really sad. And it breaks you 100%. You are a literal, like, that is when you start to not recognize yourself anymore. You're so tired. You're so like in the midst of, you're drained emotionally in every way. You are like, I am just in this, and it builds camaraderie because you're in the midst of this insanity with other people. And
trauma
so
bonding.
We're totally trauma bonding. We're a lot of us leaving our homes for the first time. You know, there's not a lot of time to talk to anybody. They really don't like for you to talk to a lot of the people from your past unless, you know, they're affiliated with the evangelical movement very strongly. You're not allowed to date. You're not allowed to, I couldn't talk to boys my first year unless it was for like a practical school purpose. This is like, I remember coming out of that year and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know that I know how to talk to a guy anymore. And for the entire time that I was there, that was like, I think I was there.
After your first year there, or after your first year out?
After my first year there, because your first year ends, you leave and you can talk to boys again. But you're supposed to still be, you know, very careful about how you do it. You don't want to lead them on. You don't want to be provocative. You know, we had to wear shirts, tank tops under our shirts all the time so that we couldn't show any midriff, wear shorts over our bathing suits, tank tops over our bathing suits. Everything was about, we constantly were hearing about protecting our brothers in Christ, protecting them from molesting, protecting them from wanting us. Oh yeah, it was our job.
This is like the original, well, maybe she was asking for it. Like, what the frick? We have a special guest who is actually a friend of mine, a new friend of mine that I met through a podcast episode that we did for her show. And then we did an episode for my show, making Dr. Elizabeth Federick the first two-time guest here on Eyes Wide Open. Dr. Liz is a licensed therapist. She's a relationship expert. She is also a relationship and intimacy coach. I wanted to talk about toxic cycles and toxic traits in relationships and what causes them, how to recognize them, how to break them, or when to know to leave a relationship. Let's get to this interview so you can go through and into relationships with your eyes wide open.
How I would describe toxic would be something that is unhealthy, unsafe. It creates activity in your nervous system. And the toxic cycle is basically that. So unhealthy and unsafe, but it's on loop. And so the toxic cycle is when two individuals or more, but let's say for the sake of this conversation, two individuals have an inability to treat each other in the way that they each need to be treated in that dynamic. So in a healthy, appropriate way, meeting each other's needs, showing up for each other, yet they're also unwilling to remove themselves permanently from the relationship. And so they stay in it and they talk about how mistreated they are, how much they're a victim to this, but they don't remove themselves. And so what we see from the cycle is there's this infatuation phase where they're all about each other. They're just obsessed with each other. Often something happens to trigger one or the other. So something is said, something is done. It can be very minor. The trigger in the one person, the way they react to that, triggers the other person, which then creates conflict. The conflict blows up out of control. Things are said and done that both individuals get hurt. This often leads to one or both abandoning. So there's a separation in the dynamic. Some time goes by and somebody puts out feelers, reaches out, the other one slowly starts to warm up. They come back into this dynamic, but nothing is discussed because heaven forbid. I mean, we know how easy it is to get triggered in this dynamic, right? So nothing is worked through. We're just going to pretend like nothing happened and we're back to infatuation. And that is the toxic cycle.
That is so relatable, ironically.
Yeah, it really is for so many of us.
Yeah, I think so many of us are in a toxic cycle. Even if the relationship isn't necessarily doomed, I think we all sort of have these cycles that we get ourselves into, and sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. But what do you think is, in your experience now with coaching, I would say more specifically, what type of triggers are people getting? Are they coming from past relationships? Are they coming from family life? Is it a mix of all of it? Like what causes us to build up these emotions where our nervous system just enters fight or flight?
Yeah, so important to understand because this can help to really normalize it for a lot of people. I think I kind of spoke on this last time we talked on your pod, so I will kind of repeat myself a little bit here, but what really is important to understand in this dynamic of getting triggered is the way the amygdala works. And so the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain, right? And we've talked through this, and it is designed to store sensory memory. And so any threats or experiences that you've had in the past that have created fear or a traumatic response for you gets stored in the amygdala, but all of the sensory components of it get stored. And so when you get triggered, it doesn't have to be an exact situation. It can be anything that reminds any of your senses of this previous threat, which then sends you into a threat state. And so then what happens when your amygdala is fired is it releases all these biochemicals that send your body into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But for the sake of this conversation, the fight or flight. And so when you do that, you are now reacting often in an aggressive, or so it's either that you get reactive or you shut down. It's often that behavior that then triggers your partner, because if you get reactive, that can be scary and remind them of something from their childhood or a previous relationship. If you shut down and withdraw, that can trigger things such as rejection and abandonment. And then, as we know, that the trigger cycle gets pretty activated.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, have you been in any toxic relationships that you want to share what your cycle was?
Yeah, so very similar. So the relationship that I was in after my divorce was very reactive in that way. And I talk about it in my book. And I talk about that it could be something as simple as a facial expression would create an activation in me because it would remind me my dad was so scary to me that it would be something as simple as him coming home with the scowl on his face. I didn't know what that meant, and I was not going to find out. And so with this partner, there was a lot of similarities to both of my parents, but really to my dad in that way. And so it would be something as simple as his face shifting, and I would become reactive. I would get defensive, and then, as you and I have discussed many a times with our snarkiness that can sometimes come up when we feel threatened, I would make a comment, which then would activate that. But yeah, I mean, that's a big part of my book as I talk about the toxic relationship. Even as a relationship expert, I got sucked into, to be fair, I didn't become a relationship expert until this relationship because it made me aware of I need to check in on this. I need to grow my awareness around all of this.
Today we have Rushi Kota as our guest. Rushi is an actor, a member of SAG, and you may recognize him if you're watching the video or know his name from his recurring appearance on Grey's Anatomy, Never Have I Ever, the Netflix show, and also recently he starred in Make Me a Match, which was a Hallmark original movie. So Rushi and I got connected through a mutual friend recently, and after we had a quick conversation, I wanted to talk to him a little bit about SAG and the writer's strike and what actually is being fought for. So I hope that you listen to this and this helps you understand the SAG strike, the WGA strike, and what we're trying to accomplish with Unscripted Cast so that you can view all of these things with your eyes wide open.
I was immediately getting recognized while I was working. People would come up to, it was really awkward. I was like, they didn't make it fun for sure. They're like, they would come up and just start taking photos. And they're like, hey, can we get a photo of you? I'm like, I can't right now because I'm working. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they would just start taking photos anyway. Um, uh, and people would just be like, I know who you are, blah 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 blah, and like start talking about my life like they were like we're friends, like we're I had this one person who was a huge fan of the show, and then she sat at the bar and just like racked up a huge bill, right? I forget, it was like $250 or like $300 or something, and then she expected me to like take care of it because she was a huge fan of the show. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is a business. I am working. Like, what world are you living in right now?
People tend to think just because they saw you on TV that all of a sudden you're like a made person. And, I always say, I'm like, people just assume that like you get this Brinks truck, I always say, that just backs up, drops off a wad of cash, and then you're good to go just because they saw you on TV. And that's not the case. And I recently started talking a little bit about I've been struggling finding a job. I've been in marketing, tech as an executive. Yeah. And it's been wild. So there isn't this just steady stream. Even being, part of a union or something, you get more, but you're still not necessarily going to get, a living wage.
No,
for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's definitely not what people think it is, or even at me signing up for something like this, it's definitely not what I envision for my like financial situation of being on this many amount of projects, but then also like having a side hustle like that. To me, doesn't make sense, right? So you would think for you as well, of you're on this huge show that this many people amount of watched, and then yet you're struggling so much on the other side of it. It's just crazy, man.
It is.
And that's what this industry is for most people. I think for the first 5 years, I had as many like odd jobs as possible. I remember working I remember bartending at a strip club one time.
Somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's got to do it, but it only lasted for a month. I was like, this is crazy. And then, I was like, I taught acting at this school of modeling for Barbizon. You see all the commercials for it, and I was like, this is also really shitty. And then I was like shooting headshots, and I was just trying to find my footing for literally 5 years. And it was paycheck to paycheck every single week. And I was like, and then my mom was paying rent, and I was like, it was tough. It's crazy. It's like, if I think they were one of these newsletters that they sent out, they were doing the math of one of these execs, if how much they were getting paid per day, and after they just got a few $1 million pay bump, and how many in one day, how many people, how many actors, how many writers they can take care of for just one person's pay. So you know what I mean? Like this many individuals can have health insurance. They can have a livable wage if you just give up one day of pay. And they don't want to do that.
This is where, so I don't want to get into this huge economics conversation, but
yeah,
this is where I always kind of get locked up, because like I get it, right? Capitalism is kind of exploitative. It can really be based on greed, and without proper regulations, in my opinion, it doesn't work. But what I think is crazy here is the way, we might spend $5 as a common person, or $20 on something stupid. Like they can give everyone healthcare or whatever those numbers are, and they can do that without noticing it's gone. Just like we wouldn't notice $20 is gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And they just don't do it.
No, they don't. It's like what does one individual need with that much money? Like what are
they doing with it?
What are they doing? How many houses do you need? How much art do you want to buy? How many things do you want to collect? Like it's just superfluous and it's gratuitous to have any single person making that much money. It just makes no sense.
Our guest today is Calley Means. Calley is a former consultant in the food and pharma industries turned activist and advocate against them. I've been following Calley for at least a year now, if not a little bit longer, after seeing him on Breaking Points. This is a great episode. I'm going to be super curious to hear what everyone says. And hopefully, when you finish this episode, you can look at the world and look at the food and the industries in front of us with your eyes wide open.
So I think you really have to understand the handoff between food, which is making us sick, and then a healthcare industry, which is now the largest and fastest growing industry in the country, because it profits off us being sick. So this is what was so interesting to me, looking back on literally having one meeting with the food industry, one meeting with the pharma industry. So the post-World War II thrust of food policy has been towards ultra-processed food. So 100 years ago, we were eating largely fresh food and we had very few chronic conditions. The issues that were killing us were acute conditions like infections or complicated childbirth, things like that, which medicine has been amazing at, but we didn't have many chronic issues and we were eating whole food. Post World War II, there was a big thrust. The Marshall Plan, feeding the world, shelf stable. So that led to a big, potentially for the right reasons of processed food that could be shelf stable, but the industry then co-opted that and realized that you could, put a lot of addictive ingredients, put a lot of sugar, put a lot of basically weaponized food if we're making it in a lab. And now today, close to 70% of our diet is ultra-processed food. And ultra-processed food contains ingredients that we just aren't biologically, evolutionarily made to eat. There's seed oils, which are industrial byproducts. There's, we're eating 100 times more sugar than we did 100 years ago. It's unprecedented, the, processed sugar. And then highly processed grains, I would even say potentially is the worst. That's a new invention of the past 100 years where you take the fiber off. That's how these items can stay on the shelf for years. But that fiber blunts the glucose impact and is where a lot of the nutrition is. You kind of have to ask a question: if a food isn't rotting on years on the shelf, what's going on there? What's happening? So you've got chemically laden processed ingredients, artificial ingredients. That's the bulk of our diet. And then, the food industry has become, obviously, it's one of the largest industries in the country. And I just think it's important to point out, as the cigarette industry declined in the 1980s, as there was more and more backlash to cigarettes. In the 1980s, Philip Morris was the fifth largest company in the world. The cigarette industry really declined. All of the scientists went to food companies. So there's thousands and thousands of scientists. All the cigarette scientists went to food companies. And there's been this trend. And again, in the interest of the food companies, it makes sense. The food has become cheaper and it's become more addictive by design. Okay, kind of makes sense. Not great. It's destroying our health. But that makes maybe sense from the food industry's standpoint. The problem is, and the devil's bargain is, that you would expect the healthcare industry, as every rate of every chronic disease is going up, as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, autoimmune conditions, allergies, literally everything's going up all at once because of food, because we're basically poisoning ourselves. That's not even really in dispute if you really push. But there's no alarm bell being rung. The dean of Harvard Medical School isn't on the halls of Congress saying we need to cut sugar for kids. Dr. Fauci, who oversaw chronic and autoimmune conditions for 40 years, that was his main purview. And they went from 8% to 65% of the American people had a chronic disease under his 40 years purview, as he funded trillions of dollars to study drugs to manage those, not cure them. Like there's a whole ecosystem here where people profited. People are profiting from people getting sick, and actually actively, not only not calling it out. When I was working for food companies, we funded medical groups. The Coca-Cola has funded millions of dollars to the Diabetes Association, to the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it's not only silence, it's actually in a way, direct collusion, where these industries that are actually creating the diabetes, creating the kidney disease, creating the liver disease, are actually funding, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association. So that's where the devil's bargain comes in. We need moral clarity, I think, from the medical system to call out the root cause of why we're getting sick. But that would be economically disruptive. Every hospital in this country needs more diabetic folks. They need more obese patients. They need more people with heart disease in order to fill their beds. The pharma companies make money off, these pills you don't stop taking. You just take the statin, the metformin, the SSRI. You get on this cascading chronic disease treadmill and you take these pills for life. So this would be very disruptive to the business model. I think unpacking that incentive that we're getting poisoned by our food and that the largest industry in the country wants that to happen economically, not even getting into any motivations. It's just an economic fact. That's a big issue we need to grapple with.
Today we're going to talk with Danny LoPriore, and Danny's a stand-up comedian. He's a musician. He got his start on Vine, but he's also a podcast host of 2 podcasts, and most importantly, he's a mental health advocate. And on his second podcast, Off the Cuff, I was a guest a few weeks ago, and we just really bonded sort of over not just the mental health stuff, but just general life stuff. So I invited him to come on the show. Let's talk a little bit about anxiety. Let's talk about mental health. And let's hope that this helps you go through life with your eyes wide open.
The toxic double standard. It's like, as a comedian, I've always had a love-hate with like the term toxic masculinity, because I do believe in being masculine in a sense, because that's just kind of how I was kind of raised. My grandfather was a masculine guy. My father was masculine, even though he liked art. He liked to sing. But my father had an old school Italian American part of him, Yeah. So some of that is in my DNA. Like I can't refuse things that are in my DNA. Like I can't.
You shouldn't have to.
No.
And that, like we're in a culture now where some people do view just masculinity as toxic, and it's like I don't think that's how it needs to be. There is toxic masculinity, in my opinion, but it's not all toxic masculinity.
That's why it's like, as a comic, like I have to go into that from time to time, being like, hey, listen, like just because like I'm gonna watch Red Zone on Sunday for 9 hours, like doesn't mean I'm a toxic man. I just fucking love football.
Same. Yeah.
Like it has nothing to do with me being like a masculine asshole. Like I want to win my fantasy league because I'm a nerd. That was the biggest double standard too. It's like, oh yeah, let's beat up the nerds in school, but you could tell me like how many yards Peyton Manning passed for last year, you fucking dork.
Yep.
Like where I'm a nerd about sports. Like I told my wife, like, listen, like I'm gonna be disconnected on Sundays for about 5 minutes.
I do the same thing. I'm like, if it ain't watching football, I'm not doing it.
No, and don't ever make a plan for me on a Sunday ever. And I know that comes off as toxic masculinity, but it's just part of my DNA.
Yeah.
Toxic masculinity to me, and masculinity, just like you said, I think you put it perfectly, that we're in this weird era where you cannot be masculine
without guilt.
Without guilt.
At the least.
Like, listen, as anybody who I respect everybody's, we were talking about being sexually fluid. Like I respect everybody so much. I have a trans nephew. I have gay friends. I have bi friends. I've never judged anybody for their sexuality. So if I get like judged for masculinity sometimes, I can't speak out too much about it, because it's like it's almost like
toxic.
It's like white privilege.
It is. No, dude, I totally agree. And that was one of your jokes in your stand-up act that I was listening to. You talk about all the struggles white people have gone through, and then and then the airport, they're the ones that decide who's white and who's not.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said everybody wants to know, like, if you're like mixed race and you're having a hard time. I'm Puerto Rican and Italian, and like I spent most of my life like, am I just like Italian or am I Puerto Rican? Like, where do I lean like more? And then I just realized that I was Arabic or Muslim, because every time I go to the fucking airport, people stop me all the time. I get stopped in the airport all the time. The airport decides your race. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the end all be all. That's the race meter, because I'm telling you right now, I've been stopped way too many times because of this beard. I've been
It's
stopped.
so ridiculous.
I've been stopped a lot. And like, I'm a comedian and I joke, but I've been stopped maybe 7 or 8 times.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I've been profiled at the airport more than I've been profiled on the street, which is crazy.
That's crazy. Today we are going to talk all about holistic health. I have an herbalist and the founder of Ancient Bliss Supplement Company, Macy Schuchart, on the show today. She is an expert on herbs and Eastern medicine and using those traditional Eastern herbs to help supplement our lives, help us get the minerals and the vitamins that we are sorely missing in our diets today. I love talking about holistic health. I enjoy what I know about Macy, and let's get to that interview.
I think Western medicine can still be very beneficial in people who have certain conditions. Like Western medicine is very helpful. It's a great tool. I just think that blending Western with Eastern is very powerful, and Eastern medicine can be very preventive. And I think that a lot of doctors are not giving people the option to take Eastern medicine.
Mm-hmm. They're not versed in it. Here's the thing, like, doctors are trained in medicine. They're not trained in health and wellness. So that's always going to be, a challenge, especially here, I think. So having, experts like yourself and others in the more holistic space is growing, but it's also helping blend the preventative or Eastern and the Western, where maybe we can stop some of these things from happening that you need medicine for, Western medicine for, and prevent them in the first place through, just helping your overall wellness.
Exactly. And the body is an amazing self-healing machine. And if you give it the right nutrients, your body knows exactly what to do with it. It can heal itself. It's very powerful.
So what about CMOS? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so all of my supplements are based off of what our ancestors used to use. So especially in the Caribbean regions, CMOS is a really powerful multivitamin. And instead of it being synthetic vitamins, it's vitamins that come naturally from the sea. So if you think about it, we're mostly water beings. We're made up of mostly water. And there's actually 2 plants. And these are the 2 plants in the whole world that when you take them both together, you get all 102 minerals that your body needs to function. So that's sea moss and bladderwrack. And when you combine those 2, you now have all your minerals. And because of what we talked about with like the food supply and pesticides and all of these new things, our soil is obviously changing. We're very mineral deficient as a society, and these can lead to things, like bone problems, fatigue, thyroid issues, lack of energy, low libido, all of these things. So that's why I really love CMOS. It's kind of considered the islander's secret. So
yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard the people in the Caribbean are like really good lovers. It's because they take CMOS.
Oh, okay. All right. Good to know. Well, I'm glad I'm on it then. That's awesome. I had no idea. That's why they were.
Yeah, it's great for energy and libido. It's great for energy. It's also really good for thyroid health. So a lot of people have thyroid issues. This is what can cause fatigue. And again, it's not really people's fault. Like they're not doing anything wrong. It's just our food has changed so much that we have all these endocrine disruptors. So even like just the plastics in our water bottles and the like clothes we wear have certain, chemicals on them. And all of these can mess up our thyroid functioning, our hormone health, all of those things. And it's also really good for fertility and hormone health as well. But infertility is a pretty big problem now too in the upcoming generations and in this world. And it's because of these chemicals that are everywhere.
Today we have Eli Weinstein, or as I find out in the middle of the recording, actually goes by Ellie. Eli Weinstein is a licensed clinical social worker, therapist, and also specializes in couples and parenting. But today we're going to have him on to talk about men's mental health. I hope you can listen to this episode, learn a little bit about male and men's mental health, and that will help you go through the world and maybe look at the males in your life, or if you're a male, you'll be able to go through your life with your eyes wide open.
If we look at a classic style of heterosexual relationships and families, the mom is always considered the nurturer.
Mm-hmm.
But you do see beautifully nurturing fathers. It's not that men are not nurturing. They haven't needed to be.
Right.
Or they didn't need to tap into that because of just the wife was at home or whatever the structure used to be, that it was built in that, okay, you're taking care of that. Everything else needs to be taken care of. If you're busy with that, I have to be busy with this, and kind of like shut off that part of them. But it's part of everyone. And I think it's a human thing to be a nurturer and a loving person, or a compassionate, caring with emotions. But even that idea of a friend crying and you're like, what do I do here? Because we don't talk about it. We don't understand what it's like. But, if your partner cried, you would know what to do. It wouldn't be so foreign to you, because you would see that more often than once every 30 years, right? It wouldn't, so it creates this comfort within that system. And I'm not saying we have to go and cry every day, and go and take a video and send it to all your guy friends and be like, this is what I look like when I cry, and here's what I need.
Like in your fantasy football group chat.
Right. It's like, I lost, it's like, how could you? But in reality, women just have that side of them when they are just more vulnerable and open to do that in front of their friends. And it's interesting if you watch, and I've seen this happen many times, either with my wife or with friends. Well, they'll cry and then apologize for crying. I'm so sorry. I'm so emotional. And there's so much love and support anyways. There's no like, you should be sorry. How could you? No one ever says that. And if they do, you don't talk to them ever again. But with men, there is a shift of this idea of like a tribe mentality that we create, and how we show up and support each other is not going to be the same as women support each other. It might be, I'm just here to listen, or I'm here to be there with you. It doesn't have to be this overly emotional experience to have that vulnerability. It could just be, hey, I'm really stressed and struggling about money. Oh, me too, man. Or, my kids are really, really hard, and I don't know how to deal with it. It doesn't have to be this, experience of crying and big emotions. It could just be simplicity of sharing.
Right.
Any father, any man can connect with an issue that you have as a man. Like, oh my gosh, my week was so stressful. Who doesn't feel that? So I think if we start sharing simplistically with just how we feel, and not like, you good, bro? Yo, do you see the sports? Or like, even, and I know we make those jokes about men, but men do talk that way.
Oh, totally.
Right? It's not like we're just like generalizing here. It happens every day, but it could be a check-in. Hey, how are you doing? And I keep pushing this idea of something I heard from Ryan Clark from The Pivot. He asks his like male friends, how are you doing? Are you okay? And what do you need? And like, how are you doing is general. Are you okay right now? And is there anything I can do for you?
We could do so much better doing those types of things.
And I think recently something that really put a damper on that has been COVID. I think, just to point out the obvious, when we became isolated and we by nature were kind of making sure that we survived in the stressful world that was created, whether it was the family unit just not killing each other, whether it was relationships, whether it was yourself within the balance of life and not being able to, whatever the thing was, we lost that sight of other people because it became very individualized. Like, I need to survive. And that's why like all those videos of like everyone banging the things for the nurses and like everyone, caring about other people in a time like that exploded, because it's like, what about yourself? I think it's kind of conditioned us to do that a little more easily, where we worried a lot more about ourselves than others.
Yeah.
And I think there just needs to be a pendulum swing of a balance. And that's, something that's very hard when you're so used to really focusing on self and surviving. And I think and that happens when we're just so anxious and stressed about life. And I think if we have a better balance in our life, we have more space. We have more space to be able to, like your life with reality TV and the nutso-ness of that also was extremely isolating. That pulls you away, and how many people can actually connect to you on that level of what it was like to be there. It doesn't matter how many amazing interviews you do and wonderful ways that you express it. I'll never know what it was like to be there unless I was there with you. I'm sure that actually creates some camaraderie with some of the people who were there, that bought in maybe bonded trauma of experience, unfortunately.
Bonding.
Yeah. But in reality, like we isolate sometimes when we get overwhelmed, and then we don't know how to share again or how to answer because we're just too self-focused for good reason, right? To survive and be okay.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.